This is going to be the notes from Thursday, November 16th, in case you missed them or you want to see them again. So all transformations of sine and cosine graphs. First, you see at the top here, this is just the standard way the equation will be written. The cosine slash sine, well, not necessarily, it's not going to be like that, obviously. It could be that it's either the cosine or the sine. That's where the word goes. The amplitude comes from A. You take the absolute value, because amplitude is always positive. So you want to make sure you do that. Make sure you don't use the negative. The negative will reflect it, and we'll get to that one on the graph. The formula for period is 2 pi, because that's what the period is for a regular cycle of sine and cosine, divided by b. B is the number in front of the x. Whether there's parentheses there or not, it's the number in front of x. A vertical stretch or shrink is A. That's also your amplitude. Horizontal or phase shift, that's going to be C. Now, if B is inside the parentheses, you're going to do the opposite of C over B if B is inside the parentheses. Vertical shift, up and down, that's obviously going to be D. So let's graph a few of these. It says to state the period and amplitude, and then we're going to draw the graph just for one period. That's really all you have to do is for one period. You can do more than that if you'd like. So off to the side here, I'm going to make a note as to what the period is. The value for B is right there, the number in front of x. So 2 pi over 4. Reduce that, we get pi over 2. Amplitude, well, that's the number out in front of the cosine, and that's a 1. And so when we go to graph this, every time we graph it, you go 1, 2, 3, 4 marks, put the period there. The period that you calculated, not the period for the parent function. And then also mark halfway. Half of pi over 2 is pi over 4. Our amplitude is going to go on the y-axis. Now, cosine, the pattern for cosine. You have to know this. Starts high, ends high. Halfway it goes to the low point, and in between there, you go through the zeros. And there's our graph for that one. For number 2, again, period, 2 pi over b. B this time is the pi symbol, so 2 pi over pi. So the period is 2. Amplitude, well, that's the number in front, and that's a 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, halfway 1. There's no pi in that, so don't make it a pi. You got rid of it. Sine, the pattern for sine, 0 beginning, middle, end. Between the first two zeros, the sine goes up to the maximum. In this case, the amplitude is 1, so we're going to go up 1. And then between the next two zeros, it goes down, and the amplitude is 1, so it goes down 1. Now, for number 3, we have a negative. And when we have that negative, we really don't do anything with it until we go to the graph. So, period, be careful with this. When your b is a fraction, you want to make sure you make a complex fraction. So we're going to have 2 pi over 1. That's normally 2 pi, but we're going to put a 2 pi over 1 because you want 4 parts on top of b, which is pi over 2. Now this complex fraction can be simplified pretty easily. 2 pi over 2, which is 4 pi. And then in the denominator we have just a pi, so the period is 4. Amplitude is a 2, not a negative 2. Now what we're going to do, as we graph this, we're going to reflect it. Which is really you're never really going to be asked for that, but the graph needs to demonstrate that. So there's not going to be a specific spot where you're going to be able to write down reflect. I always write it down to keep track for myself, but when we go to graph it, we're going to graph it and reflect it all at the same time. So everything is the same. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's your period halfway. Amplitude is 2. Going up 2, going down 2. Now we're graphing cosine. Cosine would normally start high and end high, but we are reflecting it. So we want to put it starting low, ending low, which means halfway it's at the maximum, and in between are the zeros. So this is the upside down or the reflection of that cosine graph. And for number 3 here, period is 2 pi over b. b is 3. That does not simplify. Amplitude, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 pi over 3. Well, halfway is a 1 pi over 3. Up 1, down 1. And sine, beginning, middle, end, right on the axis. And it goes up before it comes down. Now let's go over all of them. Let me erase my little mark here. So now we could potentially have all of it. So this is really more like how the equations will be written, giving you a place to write the amplitude and the period and all this stuff down. And the directions say, well, I guess the directions don't say, but usually it'll say, if you don't have one of these, you write down none, just to identify the fact that you recognize that it's not there. Like you don't always have a vertical shift, things like that. So our amplitude, you will always have this. The amplitude obviously is a 3. Period is going to be 2 pi on top of 1/4. Now again, with your fractions. 2 pi over 1 over 1/4. This is going to be 8 pi over 1. Vertical shift. This is the value that's right inside here. We're going to always, if it's a negative, you know it moves right? Because that's the way it's always been. Positive, it moves left. So we're going to move right 1 pi. Now, how far is that? We're going to have to wait to see what that looks like. Horizontal shift, we're going to go up 2. So make sure I can see all that. So now when we go to draw this, we are going to draw the graph twice. We are going to the right, so I want to make sure I have a little bit of extra room to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 8 pi, halfway 4 pi. So this one's not that awesome to graph. Right pi. Well, one space is really 2 pi. So I'm going to only go half a space to the right. That's it, just half of a space. Not even the whole space. We have to make sure we have enough room for up 2 and the amplitude of 3. So we have to make sure we have space to go all the way up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to also need to go down a few numbers. So let's just start with the up 2. And put a dotted line up 2. I'm going to also put another mark out there because I know I'm going to the right. This is 10 pi. I'm not actually going to get to 10 pi because I'm only going to get to 9 pi. But I'm not going to move it left and right yet. I'm going to draw the graph. I'm just going to pay attention to my amplitude. I've already moved it up 2. And so this is sine. Sine has a 0 in the beginning, middle, and end. I have not moved it. It goes up before it goes down. So amplitude of 3, go up 3. And then from the dotted line, we're going to go down 3. This is not the graph. This is the graph that I'm going to use to move. Now, I'm going to only move these a half a space. So each point physically is going to move a half space to the right, which is not very far. I always make a different marking for that so I can keep track of myself. I also switched colors, which you may or may not have the option to do. I almost never can switch colors. So then we're going to just connect these new kind of marks. Do not force your graph to go through 0, 0. This graph doesn't go through 0, 0. When we moved it up 2, it doesn't do that. So don't feel like you have to connect it to 0, 0. You can just leave the ends the way they are. Now for number 6, amplitude obviously 4. Period. I feel like I can't see that. Period is going to be, here's your B. Oops. Trying to write, not writing. There's the B. There's the C. Now, B is inside the parentheses here. This is D. So our period is 2 pi over 3. Already reduced, you don't have to do anything to it. Vertical shift, we want to go the opposite of C, which you really don't need to do the opposite if you don't want to, because you know it's right. It's really C over B. So we are right pi over 3. Again, we'll see on the graph what that looks like, how many spaces that is. And our horizontal shift is down 1. Trying to give myself enough space to draw this here. All right. So I have an amplitude of 4. I have to go down 1, so I need to go down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's your negative 5. We probably have to go up 3. And we are down 1, so I'm going to put it, oh wait, I have to go the other way, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 pi over 3, halfway, 1 pi over 3. Now you can see pi over 3 is 2 spaces. So we are going to move this whole graph 2 spaces to the right. And we do this last. Down 1. This one is cosine. Cosine starts high. Now the amplitude is 4. So from here we're going to go up 4. And at 2 pi over 3 we're going to be up 4. At pi over 3 we're going to be down 4. And then right in the other two we're going to be in the middle. Now since we have to move this thing, I'm going to draw a dotted line. We have to move this thing 2 to the right. Please make sure that on your axis you go 1, 2. This is 3 pi over 3. Make sure you label that. I labeled it up here and I labeled it here. So when you add numbers to the right or to the left, you label them. All right, so now let's graph this. Let's move this all over 2 spaces to the right. So 1, 2. Again, I'll make a little different spot. Just keep track. It's okay if the points land on top of another point. This is the graph. Again, do not connect it to 0, 0. It doesn't do that. It just sort of is hanging out there. All right, this is the shape of it. And we want to make sure we have that shape.